Yeah, you too. Really excited to be here. Thank you so very much. I'm going to use my clicker. Yes. Yep. Are we good? Okay. So the title is a little intimidating, to be honest with you. So I was like, wow, extraordinary. What have I done that is extraordinary? So I decided to kind of present some of the women that I feel are really extraordinary before I go into my own story. So recently, if you haven't, I don't know how many of you all have Netflix, but I love Netflix and I love the documentaries on there. They have a documentary called The Queen of the Mountain, I believe it's titled. And Lakpa Sherpa is this incredible woman who has climbed Mount Everest 10 times. And I was like, wow, that's extraordinary. So just FYI, you all should read her. So I was watching it as I've been trying to kind of process how I was going to tell my story and interweave it to how I came back to Boulder. But yeah, she's pretty impressive. I was like, gosh, I think I'm a runner. I've run the distance of a marathon, but I'm too cheap to buy the ticket. So I'm like, well, I could say that. And then I thought about Dolores Huerta, who is the co-founder of the United Farm Workers Union, and has just, the woman is 90 and still going to rallies and still encouraging people to vote and to use their voice and fight for immigrant rights. And I was like, maybe you all should also bring Dolores Huerta here. And then as a proud Mexicana, I am born in Mexico, and my family, I'll tell you my story in a little bit, but my family immigrated to the States when I was very young. And when I took my first class in ethnic studies, I learned of La Malinche. She was actually the interpreter to Hernan Cortés when he arrived in Mexico and he began to conquer the Americas. But La Malinche has an interesting story in that she's often portrayed as kind of a deserter, a traitor, this bad person who interpreted and translated for Hernan's army and the indigenous people throughout the Americas, and in particular, central Mexico. But she has a really fascinating story in that she spoke multiple languages, and she is coined or titled the mother of mestizos, because she had the first child who was of Spanish and indigenous descent, which is my people, as a Puerto Rican. So I was like, oh, she's extraordinary. You can't bring her back, but I think telling her story is really impressive because, again, it reframes the contributions of women and indigenous women to, in particular, Mexican history and Latin American influence. So my story is this story. I'm from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, which borders El Paso, Texas. I am a proud Chihuahua resident. Currently, I still have family in Mexico that travel back and forth, and I have the privilege of holding citizenship, so I'm able to go back and visit my family. But this was a turning point. The first time that my family was able to immigrate to the United States, it was with the tourist visa. And so, as many immigrants in this country, my family started to establish roots in Boulder, Colorado, of all places. And so we were able to go back in the late 80s for the first time to Mexico and to Ciudad Juarez. And after that, my summers were spent in Ciudad Juarez because my parents couldn't afford summer camps or childcare during the summer. So my dad took a quick day off, drove to Ciudad Juarez, dropped us off, we'll see you later, and then we drive back. So that, for me, that was that turning point in understanding my roots and identity. And really the socioeconomic reasons by which many immigrants, like my family, immigrate to really all parts of the world. My family decided in Boulder, Colorado. But this piece, if you know Juarez, you know that there is like this mountain, obviously, and there's this hill that says, La Biblia es la verdad, léela. So that means it translates to the Bible is the truth, read it. So I'm not preaching here, but the interesting piece is when I started to go back to Ciudad Juarez, people would tell me, well, where do you live? Where's your family from? And I would describe, oh, it's near the woods, near the mountain. And they're like, oh, okay. But what I realized later in my life was that the neighborhoods around this particular hill were really poor. And so when I would tell people where I was from, that was my landmark in the streets. And they were like, their reaction was really a reaction to like, oh, poor. And then I started to really appreciate what those words meant to the communities around it. My parents, my family in Ciudad Juarez didn't have running water, didn't have heat. And if you know anything about the El Paso Mexican border, the climate is very similar to Colorado. It gets really cold. So I remember traveling to Ciudad Juarez during the winter break and trying to take a shower when it was really cold and my family didn't have heat. So I remember running around the shower because I was like, okay, I have soap in my hair. Okay, breathe, you can do it again. And I'd run through it again. And that again was a turning point for me because when I would come to Boulder, Colorado, back to Boulder, Colorado, it was such a different experience for me. And yet, I was poor in both borders. I was poor in Boulder and I was poor in Ciudad Juarez. But I didn't learn that until later. Don't worry about the sound, but that's our first house in Ciudad Juarez. And my father, when he goes back, he takes pictures and he sends it to us as a reminder of where we come from and really where we're going. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to show this. But again, it's just my father, as you can see. His video skills are a bit limited. But it's a reminder of how important my history is to me and my family, and now my children. The other part of who I am is music. As an immigrant in Boulder, Colorado, there wasn't a lot of people who looked like me in the early 80s as my family was trying to build community. We lived in San Juan del Centro, and it was considered back then kind of the projects of Boulder. But it was really this beautiful community that was so diverse. But part of my upbringing was music. And my father was very, very committed to ensuring that we knew the music that told our story of immigrating to the United States, the story of being a proud Mexicana, the story of our food, of our travels, of the challenges. And these are some of the artists that I still listen to. So if you see me driving down 119 banging the music, it's probably one of these artists. And they're really, again, for Mexican people, these artists are important in that they're symbols, again, of our culture. Some of them are well-known internationally. A lot of their music has been translated to multiple languages. But in particular, Los Tigres del Norte is kind of a folklore, I would say, genre, and it's kind of embedded with a little bit of country. But they tell the challenges that migrants and immigrants faced in the United States trying to live this American dream. They started to explore kind of their advocacy and their social justice. And Los Tigres del Norte, a few years ago, supported one of the candidates, and the Mexican people, the people who followed them, were like, yes, finally, right? And it was so powerful for us to be recognized in those platforms. And so if you're ever bored and you understand Spanish, I challenge you to look on YouTube or Apple Music and listen to their songs because they hit close to home. I remember growing up and being in the apartment in San Juan del Centro with my uncles and my aunts, and we were having gatherings and parties, and Los Tigres del Norte would be in the background. And once their song would come on, it was like, oh my gosh, everybody, start singing, start feeling the power and this loneliness in a way, because we were no longer in our community and our home country. And they talk about trials and tribulations. And so as they were listening to the music, as I was listening to the music, with my parents and my uncles and family, it was like, oh, it's telling their story. It's telling their story of struggle, but yet there's a story of triumph. And so this is Vicente Fernandez, who is another artist who passed away just a few years ago. But if you've ever gone to a Mexican restaurant, you have heard his music. Every mariachi, from here to the furthest European country who has mariachis, sings his music. And we have Jose Alfredo Jimenez here in the corner. My father, growing up, was a Jose Alfredo Jimenez fan. So if you've ever heard the song El Rey, Sigo siendo el rey. Again, it's mariachi music. I'm sure you've heard it at a Mexican restaurant. But that was the music that I grew up with. And it was a turning point for me again, because it was a symbol of who I was in that intersection of my connection to Mexico and yet my upbringing in the United States, in particular, Boulder, Colorado. So this is San Juan del Centro. I was there when I was very young. And I remember having friends from, if you've been in Boulder for longer than, do the math, 30, 40 years, you'll know that there at one time, Boulder was also home to a very prominent Cambodian and Vietnamese community. Many of them lived in San Juan del Centro, and many of them I grew up with. And it was such a beautiful feeling to see that community intersect with the Mexican Latino community when I was growing up. I have friends who were from the Cambodian community, the Vietnamese community, African immigrants, and we all seem to land there, and we all seem to land as kids in that jungle gym there. It has been improved. This is from Google Maps, so I just want to say it did not look that way when I was growing up. But again, it was this turning point for me because I had community there, community that looked so different from my own, but at the same time, community who identified as being Mexican immigrants. And we were all trying to find our place in Boulder, Colorado in the 80s. And so for me growing up, San Juan del Centro has always been a part of who I am and my identity. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that intersection in my role now, being the ED of the I Have a Dream Foundation. But before I go there to the present, I want to talk a little bit about the past. So as I mentioned previously, my parents came on a tourist visa. And we overstayed it when my father was like, okay, I think this is a safer space for my two daughters at the time. My father was a police officer in Ciudad Juarez at a time when it was really dangerous. In the late 70s and early 80s, there was a lot of conflict between what used to be the gangs in Ciudad Juarez that are now known as the carteles, but in the past it was kind of gang members who really started this fight and this kind of war, if you will, against the police department in Ciudad Juarez. And so when my father realized that it was safer for us to be here, he decided to keep us here. And he has 3 girls. So raising 3 girls in Mexico was also really difficult for him. He knew that it was going to be really hard, one, to educate all 3 of us and put us through college and ensure that our safety was a primary kind of focus of the spaces and places that we would navigate as young women. So they decided to stay. I would say, though, that it was actually my mom's decision because my mom had family here. My dad has always been a very proud Mexicano who one day he says, I'm gonna go back. One day I'm gonna go back. And my mom's like, no, I don't think so. But in the 80s, in Boulder, Colorado, in particular, there were a lot of what we call raids. There were a lot of immigrants who were coming through Boulder County, either temporarily or working in the fields. There was a lot of contention around the safety of the community and the fear that immigrants and those who were different were causing. And so in the early 80s, there were what we used to call phone trees. And so one night, my mom and my dad worked 3 jobs growing up, and my mom worked 2 jobs. One night, she happens to be home, and she gets a phone call on the rotary phone, You all remember that one. And it's this, her whole color changes. And she starts gathering her kids up. Then all of a sudden my dad gets home and we were like, whoa, something's going on here, what's happening? So the phone call that she received was to inform her that immigration was in the community, in particular Lafayette at the time, and that they had addresses of all the undocumented immigrants, and they were starting to pick up. So we got the phone call that La Migra is in Lafayette. And so my mom got super nervous, called my dad at work. My dad never, ever took a day off, except if it was an emergency, and this was an emergency. We might all get deported. So he shows up, and he picks us all up. And interestingly enough, he parked the car just a few blocks away from where we lived in Lafayette. And we crawled, it was dark at this time, and we crawled to this particular park. If you're familiar with Lafayette, it is on Cleveland Street. It's on the west side of Lafayette Elementary. There are a lot of townhomes in that area. And each of the townhomes has like this little jungle gym and park area. And so my father parked the car a few blocks away, and it was pitch dark, and we crawled to make sure that our townhome, was safe. So we saw a white van pull up. My father got super nervous, picked up the girls, my mom and him started running towards the car, and they head to Boulder. And in Boulder, we landed at 7-Eleven on Folsom and Belmont. That was a turning point for me because it was a moment that I knew that I could be separated from my parents. They talked about what could happen. They talked about our separation. Where would you go? Where would we go? How would we get connected again? How my father in particular would ensure our safety. And I remember driving to Boulder, listening to him tell my mom, todo va a estar bien, todo va a estar bien. No te preocupes, everything's gonna be okay. Don't worry, don't worry. My sisters and I were like, what is happening? And knowing the fear that my mom had, we started to realize what could happen because my father started to talk about, here's plan A, here's plan B, and we need to figure out what's gonna happen tomorrow. So we get to the 7-Eleven on Folsom and Belmont, and unbeknownst to a lot of people now, there were payphones there. There was a payphone in this corner. So my father gets out of the car with my mom, collect their coins, call my aunt, because my mom realized as she's panicking, driving down Arapahoe Street, she realizes that she left the frijoles on the stove, the beans. She left the beans cooking, and she panicked. And she was like, oh my gosh, not only are we gonna get deported, but our townhome complex is gonna get burnt down because I left the beans on the stove. So she called my aunt and she told my aunt, you need to go turn off, because my aunt actually did have residency, so she was protected. So my aunt goes over there, she's like, you did leave the beans on the stove. We show up the next day, everything is safe. But this was a turning point for me. Because again, it was a moment of realization as this young child that I could be separated from my family and that I was different. When we lived in San Juan del Centro, the difference looked in a way so positive for me because I have friends from different parts of the world. And it was this beautiful community. But when we moved to Lafayette, I was really different as a child. I looked different, I spoke a different language. And now my status was coming into question, and I was starting to learn what that meant for me as a young undocumented woman, as a young undocumented child. And my sisters and I used to talk about what that meant. What does it mean to be undocumented? What does it mean to not have papers? Then we started to learn what the migra was and how the migra could take my parents away, and we feared that we would never see them. And so for me, that was a moment of like, what can I do to make this different for my family and I? So, IRCA. I am nonpartisan, but I want to tell you that because of IRCA in 1986, my family and I were able to become documented. That was a turning point for us. I remember walking into the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Center in Aurora, Colorado, and I remember seeing all of these people. It was like walking into the UN. All of these languages, people who looked so different from me and my family. And I could also feel the tension and the fear, because that was going to be the turning point for some of these families. And so IRCA was a turning point for my family and I, because we had no other pathway to citizenship. When my younger sister was born, she was the only American citizen. Everybody else was undocumented. And so IRCA really opened the doors for my family and I. And I am here today because of this opportunity, because of this reform. There's a lot of criticism around it, right, around the amnesty and what happens to immigrants and who's let in and who's taken out. But this, for me, and for over 2 million undocumented immigrants at the time, was the turning point. It opened the doors for my family and I to really achieve this American dream and to exist in a community, because previous to this, we were living in the shadows. We were living in fear. But the fear hasn't really changed for many, so I just want to say. So fast forward to middle school. I live in Lafayette at the time. I am the first very proud class that went through the new Angevine many years ago. But I also entered this Chola phase. That's not me, by the way. I took a picture from the internet, but it's a representation of this power that I wanted to hold as a young Latina. This existence that I wanted to experience as a young Latina, really feeling invisible at the time. And my friends and I decided to start a gang. So I would like to say, I'm claiming it, that it was the first girl gang in Lafayette. Maybe there's others, but I want to claim it. But for us, again, it was this moment of, wow, we do exist, and we're going to support each other. I was a latchkey kid growing up. As I mentioned earlier, my father worked 3 jobs, and my mom worked 2 jobs. So I would come home to an empty house. When my sister was old enough to cook for us, she would cook for her and I, while my younger sister was in childcare. And so knowing that I was coming home to an empty house, it was an empty house physically, but it was a house that was filled with love, with respect, with hard work, with commitment to fulfill the American dream. Later in life, I learned about Funds of Knowledge. Funds of Knowledge is it's a framework out of Texas that recognizes the assets and the engagement that, in particular, immigrant and migrant families hold. And that was a turning point for me, because it made me look back and it made me realize how committed my father was, how committed my mother was to ensuring that my sisters and I had a pathway to an education. My father had a 3rd grade education and my mom had a 6th grade education. And the reason why they came to this country was to give us those opportunities that they otherwise would not have had, because we come from a very poor family. And so for me, when I learned of Funds of Knowledge, I realized that my parents were constantly reminding us of the privileges that we had, and constantly reminding us that education was the pathway to success. It was a pathway to open the doors to what we would call the American dream. There's this speaker, her name is Consuelo Kickbush. She, if you know of her, she at the time was the highest ranking Latina in the Army. Retired from the Army, she became this motivational speaker, and I got to hear her my first year in college. And she talked about los papelitos, the little papers. And she tells her story of the time that she she enrolled in the military, and because her parents couldn't afford to go to college. And she said, at the first check that I got, I turned around and I MoneyGrammed it to my mom. And she said, I'm at the payphone, and I hear my mom, did you get the money? Yes, Neha, yes, I looked at it. She said, and then there was a long pause. Amat, are you okay? And then she says that her mom's like, were you selling drugs? No, that's my first paycheck. And she tells the story of the impact that it had on her parents because it was the first time her mom had ever held that much cash. And she said it was $200. She said, my mom thought it was a drug dealer. But for me, again, that moment of like, oh, that's what my parents wanted to do for us. They wanted us to open the doors for others, not just my siblings and I, but for others who have similar experiences. But my chola phase was a moment of realization for me because it helped me realize what pathway I wanted to take. I got jumped into the gang, got beat up by my friends. We beat each other up. It was pretty brutal. And I was like, yeah, I'm a chola. I'm proud of it. I remember walking through the halls of Angevine. I was like, what is it? What am I teaching? And it was one teacher, my librarian at Angevine Middle School, who pulled me aside because my chola phase started in 7th grade. So I had 1 year at Angevine where I was somewhat decent kid. And she pulls me aside and she says, you'll be back, because my middle name is Guadalupe. Lupita is a derivative of Guadalupe. So she pulls me over and she says, Lupita, what are you doing? This isn't you. I know you're better than me. And I remember thinking, what? She said, I know you can change your way. I know you can, and I believe in you. And I had heard that from my parents, and I had experienced it physically from my parents, but I had never heard it from my teacher. That was a turning point for me. I remember when I graduated from college, crying, hoping to find my librarian. Couldn't find her, but she meant so much. That one experience, that one moment in the hallway where she pulled me aside, and I looked like this. They're much better looking because their makeup is much better than mine was at 7th grade. But I tried to look like that. And I remember thinking, someone outside of my family believes in me. Someone is paving the way for me and is willing to walk beside me and encourage me. And that for me was profound. So Angevine was a turning point for me. It really slapped me in the face. in not the teachers, but it was the experience that made me realize that I could either go down a path that wasn't positive and was so contradictory to what my parents were trying to do for us. My parents, again, my father worked so many hours to give us the opportunity that he didn't have, and here I was messing it up. Because I knew Lafayette like the palm of my hand. I was roaming those streets like nobody's business, causing havoc with my friends, thinking that we were, indestructible. And when that teacher pulled me aside, she reminded me of the effort and the sweat and the tears that my parents were experiencing every day to give me a different path. And that was hard. That was hard as a young woman who was like, yeah, I'm bad, I can do this. Realizing that I had to reframe the way I was looking at my power, at my existence, and my value. I could still be a chola, I just have to be an educated chola. So that was great for me. So my parents, my father has always been an entrepreneur in spite of him having limited education. Many of the immigrants in our country are entrepreneurs and navigate very complex systems to achieve their dream of making money in the United States. My father is no exception. I remember working at La Pulga, Mile High Flea Market. Anybody go there? Maybe not, I do. But the flea market is like this massive space of nothing but these individual, really parking spaces of entrepreneurs. It's as the saying goes, someone's trash is someone else's treasure. Well, if you go to the flea market, you realize that might be the case. But my parents actually worked for a vegetable company, a fruit company in the flea market. And so we used to sell fruits and vegetables there. As a kid, I'd go out there every weekend, set up shop, sell fruits and vegetables, and then come home and figure out what was going to happen for the rest of the day, Saturday and Sunday. So my father had this grandiose idea of setting up a mobile, I would call him the pioneer food truck. But I'm sure there were others in our community who did something similar. But my father set up his Aerostar van, Ford Aerostar van, and took it apart and basically put shelving in it. And he would go to the mobile home communities, to the apartment complexes where community members like us lived and sold fruits and vegetables. I remember driving into San Juan and my dad yelling at the top of his voice that the vegetable truck was here. And I remember knocking on people's doors, Señora, me debe $3. Ma'am, you owe me $3 from last week. I was the debt collector, in addition to my sister. So it builds character. If you're in retail, it builds character. And I remember meeting a lot of the families in San Juan and the new families who were coming into the Boulder area who were trying to find community. And my father created that for them. He started selling products from Mexico in his little Aerostar van, going here and there, here and there. And it was a lot of work on top of what he was already doing. So unfortunately, my mom had an accident at work. One of the jobs that both of my parents worked at was at CU Boulder. They were in the custodial department. So my mom cleaned the dormitories for the families who would move into CU Boulder, and my father cleaned the offices of the deans, the professors, everyone who worked at CU. He cleaned Mackey Auditorium for God knows how many years. I think he got an award because he never missed a day of work. That's how committed my father was to his job. But my mother ended up hurting her shoulder and became disabled and had to leave her job. So with her disability, she decided to open up a bricks and mortar. And it's called Regenas. It was, again, I'm claiming my fame. It might not be true, so if we're in a history museum, so it might be that someone else claimed it, but I'll claim it, that this was the first store that really catered to the immigrant Latino community. And it's been around since the early 90s. And my father, his first phase of this entrepreneurship was to sell fruits and vegetables in video cassettes and VHSs. Remember those? And I remember we used to rent out these movies to really, again, the predominantly immigrant Latino community. And then that obviously dissolved. VHSs and tapes were no longer. So then he started to sell CDs, and he started to sell jewelry, and then he sold Western wear. It has evolved into so many things. But what I learned about this space that my father and my mother created was that it was a hub for the immigrant Latino community. I can tell you, again, wholeheartedly, I have no evidence, but I think I have enough to say that if you are an immigrant from a Latino country who is working in landscaping, in the custodial services, in the restaurant industry, you have come through this shop. You have met my father in particular to learn where are all the Mexican restaurants, now we hear more of the community from Central America and South America. Where are the Venezuelans? Where are the Salvadorians? Where are the Guatemaltecos? And my dad's like, oh, here, there, here. And he is a resource. He's a walking resource for the Latino immigrant community, an often undocumented community who is trying to find safe space. It is a beautiful, beautiful experience to know that my father has served as a connector and has been able to help so many families. Some of them stay, others go back to Mexico or to their home country, others move to different parts of the U.S. I remember, again, this experience talking to a young Salvadorian who had arrived in Boulder. And he was trying to find his community. He's like, there's a lot of Mexicans here. Who are the Salvadorians? I was like, well, great question. And so we became friends. He became a regular customer of my father. And going back to the Tigres del Norte, they composed a song that's titled Tres Veces Mojado. It's called Three Times a Wetback. And it was in particular catering to the Central American community that has to cross 3 borders to achieve the American dream. When that song came out, Jose, who is this Salvadorian immigrant, was like, this is my song, this is my anthem. Someone is telling the story of the struggles of Central American migrants. And we started talking about his experience. We started talking about how he arrived in the United States, why he came to the US. Did he like Boulder, Colorado? And he was like, no. Like, my cousin lives in New York, and I'm trying to save enough money to get to New York. And have you been to New York? And I was like, no, I don't even know. Like, I'm like this young high school kid trying to figure out, how do I help you? And again, that was a turning point for me, that the immigrant experience was so much more than my own. My story is so different. We overstayed a visa, we stayed, we were undocumented, we almost got deported. The fear was there, but the stories of other immigrants coming in, the 18-wheelers coming on the train, coming by foot, was so different than my own. And at that moment, I was like, wow, my family has created this space that connects the Latino community to community here. And that for me has been such a point of pride in my family. My father is aging, so we'll see what happens to that business, because I am not an entrepreneur. I like the nonprofit sector, so we'll see what happens when he's ready, if he's ever ready to retire. So I'm a first gen, as I mentioned. My father went to the 3rd grade and my mother went to the 6th grade. I graduated from Centaurus High School, go Warriors. Went to CU Denver as an undergrad, CU Boulder as a grad student, and then Texas State for my Ph.D. program. But one thing that I want to mention during these different phases was that in high school, I became a teen mom. I had my daughter my first child, when I was going to turn 17. And that was a totally different experience for me. I often don't talk about it because it took me a long time to embrace how proud I was to be a mom. But I was embarrassed at the same time because I thought, oh my gosh, people are going to judge me. When I take her to school, I'd lie about my age. And people would be like, you look really young. No, I'm like 32. Wow. And it took me a moment to, again, really appreciate that experience and what my daughter meant to me and how she changed my life forever. I remember sitting at home getting ready to do my homework. I was studying for this history exam, and I remember she was crying. She was right next to me, crying. She was just a few months old. And for a split second, I was like, would this kid's mom just come pick her up? I'm this kid's mom. So I remember picking her up and thinking, I need to get my shit together. I need to change the path. I need to focus. And my parents have always been supportive. So when they found out that I was pregnant, it was devastating for them. And it was devastating for me because I had betrayed their trust. And so I needed to focus and really, again, build a path to the dream that my parents had for me. And so that was a turning point for me. And that set the stage for everything else. I was like, I will no longer be a negative statistic. I'm going to change what this kid's experience is going to be. And I did. She graduated. She didn't get pregnant because as she was growing up, I was like, oh my gosh, the statistic of the kids of teen parents is, they're gonna be teen parents. I remember panicking and telling my husband, who we're still together, what did we do? What did we do? And I remember thinking, okay, like, we can do this together. It's gonna be okay. And my father was like, hey kid, you're gonna be all right. We're gonna get you to college. I don't know how, but I've talked to this professor who works really late at night during my night shift, and he says you can go to college. And I was like, okay, let's take a deep breath. So I ended up picking up this beautiful kid next to me, calming her down, and finishing my homework. But the interesting piece, another turning point a few years later, was I applied to CU Boulder as an undergrad because both of my parents worked there, and that was their dream. They cleaned all of these dorms, they cleaned these classrooms, they cleaned the campus, and they wanted one of us to go there. So I was like, it's gonna be me. My older sister ended up going to the military right after high school, so I was like, it's gonna be me, it has to be me. And so I apply and I meet with the academic counselor for Hispanic Latino students at the time. And I have my little baby in tow. My mom's there because she knows the building and she knows the office because she used to clean it. And I'm talking to this counselor about my dream to be the first one in my family to graduate from college. And by the way, I have this beautiful kid with me. She's like, I have to figure this out. And by the way, I'm also working. So what's the flexibility at CU Boulder? How can you help me? I have a good GPA. And this was a turning point for me because he told me that CU Boulder was not the right campus for me. He told me that I probably wouldn't fit in because my experience was so different than the traditional college students. And he told me, you really should take a step back and maybe think of a trade school. And I have to tell you that I was interpreting for my mom. And I have to tell you that it was this sinking feeling of failure, of coming to the campus and saying, you're supposed to help me. Your title says Hispanic Latino student. I'm a Hispanic Latino student. I'm a first gen. You should be helping me. And what ended up happening was that the door was closed. And when I translated that for my mom, it was devastating for her. And she was like, what does that mean? What does it mean? You can't come here? He's not gonna help you? This campus isn't for you? I cleaned it. There was this agency. I cleaned it for 15 years. Well, Mom, it's not gonna happen. And she's like, what's next? What are we gonna do? And I was like, I don't know. I was a first gen. I had nobody had talked to me about college at Centaurus. Nobody had talked to me about, explore this campus, go visit this campus. So I was like, this is the only thing I know, and I'm not welcomed here. And so, as fate has it, my sister had come back from the military at the time, and she had met an academic counselor at CU Denver. And she was trying to figure out what she was going to explore after she got out of the military. She's like, hey, don't worry, I got you. I met this counselor at CU Denver, who's a counselor of Hispanic Latino students. And I was like, oh my God, like there's some trauma there, are you sure? And she's like, no, like he's really cool. He's actually from Lafayette. He lives down the street from us. And I was like, what? And I met him, Dr. Paulincinius, who, if he ever watches this, was an angel sent from heaven. He sat me down and he said, okay, all right, Rita, where do you want to go? Tell me your story. And it was like, here it is. I think I want to do business because my parents own a business. I want to be the first one in my family to graduate from college. And I have this beautiful little kid with me. So I need flexibility. I have to work. Is this the right campus for me? And he looked at my transcripts. And he said, well, the semester starts pretty soon. We got to get rolling. I'm going to help you. And he held my hand through that entire journey. And it was the most beautiful feeling for me to know that there was someone else, another trusted adult in my life who was going to help me achieve my dreams. And he did. It took a hot second. I mean, I'm not a 4-year grad, I just have to admit that. But I graduated, and he told me, hey, like, what's next? And I said, well, he had a Ph.D., and I was like, I think I want to get a Ph.D. He's like, you're going to do it. You're going to be okay, kid. And I was like, okay, all right. Well, when I graduated with a business degree, I realized, business is not my thing. I actually really love education. But my parents at the time were like, you know what? Teachers don't make anything. Like, that's not what we want you to do. We don't want you to be a poor teacher. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do business. And again, graduated with a business degree and didn't go into it because that's for other types of people. And my type was like, I just want to make a difference in my community. So these are my parents. These are my grandparents. So from this experience of my parents, my father, 3rd grade education, my mom, a 6th grade education. Neither one of my grandparents on my father's side knew how to read or write. And here's my husband and I when I got my Ph.D. And so this was, again, a turning point for me, because at this time I was living in Austin, Texas, and just had a wonderful experience there. Loved just the community and the feeling of my culture and my language and the diversity being in every corner of this community. So I was afforded the opportunity to get my Ph.D., and I'm part of the 1% of Latinas who have a Ph.D. So that was really exciting. So Texas was also the turning point for my advocacy. I've been doing work with the immigrant community, teaching citizenship classes in high school, rallying my Latino friends, like, we can do better, like, La Raza, like, let's get together, let's graduate, we can do this. And you'll know why I was so empowered to change the experiences of my peers and myself, because the graduation rate in Boulder Valley at the time was pretty much non-existent for Latino students. And so I was rallying the troops in high school, headed over my junior year in high school to Fairview High School, which was a totally different experience for me. Tried to create a Latino group, a Latino student group, and was just torn apart by my peers at the time. But it was okay because, again, it inspired me to continue my advocacy. And in Texas, this is pre-pandemic, every weekend I felt like there was a rally. They were protesting something, and I remember my first summer there, and I'm like, it is like 150 degrees outside. What are you all doing? But it was this moment of like, when people come together, change happens. And so these are some pictures from the rallies that I attended. This is my daughter, Paloma, who's like, yes, like, we're going and we're marching and we're singing. And it was, again, a turning point for me when my voice was elevated and I had power in it. And it reminded me how coming together for a cause, we can really institute change. It might not happen overnight, but it does happen. And so, again, my experience in Texas really helped me find who I was as an advocate and where my stance was and my agency and my power to use not just my PhD, my bilingualism, my citizenship to institute change. And so, tu voz, tu poder, tu voto. I was like a rally cry for voter registration in Texas, and I had the opportunity to work with some amazing nonprofits who were doing work with undocumented and documented students, and again, gathering communities together to exercise their power and their vote. And so that for me really helped elevate who I was and why I applied to the I Have a Dream Foundation. Really, it was during the pandemic that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening, what's gonna happen to the world. I think I need to go back home and figure out, like, that closeness to my family was always there. But during the pandemic, I was like, I think I need to go back because I don't know what's going to happen to my father's business. I don't know what's going to happen to us. So the opportunity to apply to this position came up. One of my mentors gave me a call and she said, Perla, you need to apply. You need to apply. She's like, you're going to be great. They're looking for someone who has your experience. And I was like, am I ready to go back to Boulder? I know the pandemic is here and I need to be with my family, but I don't really ready to go back to Boulder. Because when I was here growing my professional career and my advocacy, I didn't feel welcomed and I didn't feel supported by a lot of people. There was a very close-knit group of what I call comadres who were like, keep going, and we were supporting each other. And so when I left to Texas, I was like, see you later, Boulder, I'm never coming back. And, well, don't ever say never, because look at where I'm at. And so when this opportunity came up, I really sat down and said, is this the right opportunity for me? But the I Have a Dream Foundation has been around since the early 90s. And the first class of dreamers, the first and second class are here. This is a picture that's up. It's a newspaper article that's up in our office. And it highlights the first and second class in the Boulder class and the Lafayette class. I know 75% of these students because I grew up with them. And I always missed, I'm not bitter with I Have a Dream, but I always missed a dreamer class by 1 year. They launched it when I turned fourth grade. And I was like, what? Then I went into another class and I was like, I just seriously. So a lot of these people I'm either related to or I grew up with. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought, wow, this is full circle. Because I remember hanging out in San Juan del Centro as a middle schooler and as a high schooler, and there were all these dreamers who were friends of mine. And they were like the cool kids. They were going to visit colleges, they had this scholarship, they were learning about FAFSA and the pathway to a 4-year institution, and you're gonna go to college and you're gonna go to college. And I was like, wow, they have this immense amount of support and I don't. So there was a little bit of envy there. I'm still friends with a lot of these. I did not write them off as they were graduating and being successful. But when I saw this position, it was for me the opportunity to give back to my community and to represent these spaces in a different way that I Have a Dream had portrayed them. And so it was really profound for me to have the opportunity, one, to go through the interview process and to get this position offered. And I remember sitting in my house in Austin, Texas, and being like, oh, am I really ready to go back to Boulder? But knowing that I was so invested in my community, that this was the right time. This was the right time to come back. It was the right position. I know a lot of the families personally that are dreamers. They know my father. And it was just, again, this opportunity to really come back and say, if I could do it, you can do it too. And that was the turning point for me, because when we look at our mission, right, it's to partner with youth and their families. And that for me has always been a part of my culture, part of my identity, is partnering with people, collaborating, connecting resources and experts together to build a better community for all of us. And so I thought, wow, this is who I am. And so here I am as the executive director of the I Have a Dream Foundation. And one of the things that I did when I came on board, as I mentioned earlier, I learned about funds of knowledge. And then I learned about another framework called community cultural wealth. And it's the professor is Sarah Yoso, and she created this framework to identify that communities who are often deemed low income or undereducated actually have a lot of capital. They have cultural capital, aspirational, familial, social, navigational, resistant, linguistic. All of that capital really is this immense amount of resources and support that communities in particular, again, who are deemed low income, and often our communities of color have to offer our community. Capital is just defined differently. And so our wealth is defined and looks very different under this framework. And when I look back to learning about funds of knowledge, and again, the strengths and the messaging that often undereducated immigrants and migrants give to their students is just as powerful as showing up in a classroom. And embedding those two frameworks in the work that I currently do has allowed me to partner with students and their families in a way that highlights what they offer to Boulder County. I strongly believe that each of our students has assets, has skills that create this vibrancy that everyone that knows about Boulder really takes pride in. And when I talk about the parents and the work that we've been doing, it for me is inspirational when I get to learn their stories of how they arrived in Boulder, Colorado. How long have they been here? What are their hopes and dreams? And so when I Have a Dream started, it really honed in on the Dreamer Scholar as a student and as an individual. When I came in 4 years ago, I took it a little bit further and approached it through a 2-generational approach and said, what can we do to the entire family? So we started a program called Advancing Families that helps the adults in the lives of Dreamer Scholars obtain their GED if they don't have one, complete their high school diploma, or if they have that, complete a trade program or go and enroll in a post-secondary program. And it has been truly powerful to hear families talk about how they're kidding around with their high schooler because they're both doing homework. Or now I know how hard it is for my student. And that's my hope and dream for each of us, that we're able to achieve those dreams that we have. So we moved from this deficit way of looking at the students of what they didn't have and what we were bringing to them to make them full, to recognizing that they have a lot and we're just meeting them where they're at and they're contributing to the success of I Have a Dream. And that, for me, that partnership, that collaboration has been truly, again, a profound change in the way we've approached our model, our curriculum, our partnership with students, because we know that we do have students who are gifted and talented, who can speak multiple languages, whose parents might have not gone to school in their home countries or here. But these students have so many skill sets that in spite of their economic levels, they're still able to contribute to our communities in a way that is so profound and colorful. And so one of the, I know I have to finish up soon, right? One of the examples that I wanted to share with you all is a couple of years ago, we formed a parent advisory committee. And through that committee, we started talking about how nonprofits are funded, how nonprofits strive to connect with donors in the community, how we're constantly trying to convince donors to invest in our mission and our work and to partner with us. And they were like, okay, well, what can we do? And I was like, well, we can fundraise. And they're like, let's try something different. I was like, do you want to be a Dreamer Scholar sponsor? Nope, let's take a step back. And so it was an opportunity for me to approach fundraising through a very culturally responsive lens. And so the Parent Advisory Committee created an initiative. They're now entering their 3rd year of selling tamales. They're like, this is what we know, and we know it really well. And we can sell tamales. If anybody can sell tamales, it's the moms in our community. And so this is a small group of our Parent Advisory who were making tamales at our office and set up shop and put the cookers outside, the grills outside, and made tamales. And they fundraised over $2,500. And it was a moment for me of realization, because after our first fundraiser, one of the moms during our meeting said, hey, I have to share something with you, Perla. And I was like, sure, like, hey, let's talk about this. She's like, I had one of my neighbors ask me if I Have a Dream was going to close. And I was like, no, we're not going to close. She's like, because they became concerned when we started asking them for money. And I was like, oof. There was this moment again of realization that we have failed in seeing our parents and our dreamer families as contributors to our mission in a way that helps them see themselves as philanthropists. And because we were asking them for $25, they thought we were really desperate and that we were going to close. And I was like, and so we talked about that, we unpacked that. And a lot of, again, what they were sharing was like, we're never asked. We're always given stuff because people assume that we don't want to give. And I was like, okay, we got to change this. And so we started to strategize and approach, again, our fundraising model in a very different way. And it has helped us continue to, we have a long way to go, but it has moved the needle forward in that now they're agents in our mission. They're philanthropists. They are giving to us in a way that isn't traditional through the giving model, but it does help them feel like they are investing in their children's education just as much as someone who is a donor. And that has been, again, a profound experience for me to go through that journey with them. And this is one of our sites. We implemented the Parent Academy, and parents are showing up. They want to learn. They're hungry for knowledge. They're hungry to achieve their own hopes and dreams. They want to contribute. They keep asking me every time I see them, what's going on? Do you have an event? I want to go. And I'm like, yes, hold on, wait, let me go through my list. I want to help. I want to, and it's so beautiful for me as a first-gen student who grew up listening to our school system say that my parents weren't invested in my education because they weren't physically there. It was profound for me because growing up, what I heard was that my parents didn't care about my education because they couldn't show up. To get to this point where they're showing up in different ways. They might not be able to volunteer during the day, but they show up making tamales until midnight at our office, selling, showing up saying, I know how to do this. I'm happy to donate the supplies to a parent meeting or a trainer class. I know how to make desserts. I'm going to do that for this class. And that for me is a turning point. And I hope that we continue to see the assets and the skills and the capital that these students and their families have so we can continue creating a Boulder County that is vibrant. So thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Oh, yes, any questions that I might answer?
So what is it, and I worked for a long time ago with one of the dreamers, but it was so long ago, and I'm just curious, is it an after-school program? Is it, what are the hours and what are you doing?
Yes, that's such a great question. So I Have a Dream is a nonprofit in Boulder County that works within kind of the educational space. Our sweet spot is the after-school programming. So we work in collaboration with our schools and campuses to offer after-school support. That entails curriculum or academic support, social and emotional learning, restorative justice, and social justice in the after-school space. We have what we call cohorts. So we work in partnership with Boulder Housing Partners and the 2 school districts in our county to identify either a campus or a community that could benefit from that additional support or those additional trusted adults in a children's life. So upon graduation of our program, our students are awarded a $10,000 scholarship. And so throughout the 13 years, it's a long-term commitment, as some of you in the room might know. And it's a partnership with the students, their families, our staff, and then the school system that they're a part of. And so we recruit what we call learning partners to help our students. Currently, we have 10 active classes, and they're all different ages right now, from first grade all the way to our post-secondary. And our program directors connect with the students either through home visits, after school programming, to check in, to support, to identify, hey, you're like gifted and talented, let's figure out how to get you into this GT class, or let's get you into AP class, or in some instances, you're struggling, let's figure out what's going on and find that support for you. So we are an after-school program. Our team members will provide support during the day to the campuses, but we're not educators, we're not teachers. We partner with those experts in our community. I hope that answers your. Oh, yeah. Okay.
How are the students selected to be part of the program?
Yeah, great question. And so they're selected either by a campus. Our only requirement is that students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So when for example, we are recruiting for our Lafayette class or junior class, which will be based out of Ryan Elementary. And we're recruiting not just from Ryan Elementary, but from all of the surrounding elementary schools. Our cohort is 45 students. And when a family identifies the interest, we do a home visit to explain what that commitment looks like. And so the only indicator is that they're eligible for free and reduced lunch. So that means that they are experiencing income inequality.
Yeah, well, maybe I can comment that kids that we supported in second grade graduated this year.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 55 kids, and 53 of them graduated this year. And the other two, they're expecting them to graduate too. It isn't easy, but it's been spectacular.
Yes, and I want to say that those two, one of them did delay. The other one actually extended because in Safe Rain, you're able to do a fifth year as long as you do concurrent enrollment classes. So one of the students that he mentioned is finishing up basically their associate's degree while have already completed their diploma, but in order to get the benefits, the financial benefits, they have to extend a fifth year. So just want to give credit. Other questions? Yes.
Will you talk about when you had that conversation with the librarian and you decided that you were gonna change who you were, I think?
Yeah.
What was that transition like? How did your friends react? Those types of things.
Yeah, it was hard, I have to say, because I think my friends, I think that again, from funds of knowledge and community cultural wealth, my parents had always planted that seed that we were going to go to college. We never knew how. We didn't know what the process was, but we knew we were going to go. And so I think in the back of my mind, listening to the librarian tell me that, it was like, oh, yeah, I better go. Like the voice, my father's voice and my mom's voice is saying this. And now someone else who is looking at me saying that I can go was, again, powerful. And I was trying to talk to my friends as we were going through middle school and into high school, like, we're all going to go to college. We're all going to go to college. We're going to go. We're going to go. And so that was a turning point that I didn't necessarily lose my friendship circle. I just tried to shift the conversations around, like, we're going to hang out and we want to tag that place to, hey, let's hang out and talk about college. And again, doing citizenship classes and being an interpreter and a translator for my parents growing up, both my sister and I, that was a lot of responsibility. And so we grew up really quickly. And so for me, a lot of my peers had similar experiences. So we were like, okay, like, we can do this. We've done this. We have these skills and we can do this. And finding people along that journey who could make that happen. And so when I accepted the position at I Have a Dream, it was because of the people who influenced me. Because I wanted to influence the students and talk to them about my journey and my story. Most recently, I've been volunteering at one of our high school sites. And the other day, I was talking to these two young girls about my own story. I was like, I was a latchkey kid, and they're like, what is that? And I had to explain, and I was like, oh. Then one of the young women said, oh, I had never seen my dad either. He works a lot. And so we're kind of unpacking how that makes you feel, right? And how that also serves as a moment of inspiration, because like my family, many of the scholars that we work with come from what we call mixed status families. So they might have a family member or a cousin or an uncle who is undocumented. And so that experience intersects their daily interaction with the people around them. And so I revealed, hey, like I come from a mixed status family. I'm not going to tell you who's undocumented, but I'm going to like tell you that I come from a family that is mixed status. I have cousins and I have uncles. I have really close friends and students that I've worked with. And so we're talking, and she's like, hey, why haven't you come before? And I was like, well, what? Because I kind of like the ED. I have a like a brother. And she's like, well, what does that mean? And so I explained, and she's like, you're pretty cool. You should come back. I was like, I will. Maybe next Tuesday. But that again was a turning point for me, because I was like, yes, I'm connecting. And I'm hopefully impacting the students that I talk to and interact with the way that librarian did, the way my first grade teacher, Paula Gossett, impacted me. As like, you're new to this community, you are welcomed at Lockett Elementary. And I remember her like giving me a hug and telling me, you're gonna be okay. Or Terry Martinez, who was a teacher's assistant at Uni Hill my kindergarten year, and that year we had lost two of our peers in a fatal car accident here in Boulder, and I remember she started singing "You Are My Sunshine" to all the students, and her holding me and telling me, you're gonna be okay, because I didn't know the song because it was in English. And she's like talking to me in Spanish and telling me I'm gonna be okay. And so my hope is that when I interact with Dreamer scholars and I tell them, you're gonna be okay, kid, like good luck, they feel the same feeling that I have felt with the educators who have impacted me. And so that's been, and I know you lose friends along the way when you kind of regroup and retrain and kind of reframe the way you're looking at what you want to do and need to like. My hope is that the Dreamer scholars know that they're going to be okay. The staff that I have at Dream become trusted adults for them. Sometimes they, with a lot of the Dreamer Scholar sponsors, they create very profound connections and they still keep in contact even after the classes have graduated. And I think that's so powerful, and it speaks to our mission in working with students and their families.
It's been a whole thing this
It's a sign.
I
am doing this room and I just found it.
It's haunting us.
What other questions or comments do you have?
I don't have a question, but you're an absolute delight to listen to.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot to preface my talk with, I'm a circular speaker, so I'm all over the place. But I do get back to the point at some point. Thank you for following this journey with me and for listening and for sticking around to the end. As I mentioned earlier, my life is extraordinary in many ways. I'm not the most famous person who climbed Mount Everest, or La Marinche, who created this new generation of Latinos, or Dolores Huerta, who's 90 years old, still advocating. But I do believe that I'm the only person whose name is Perla Delgado, the daughter of Eduardo and Cristina Delgado, a person who has a birthmark on her right foot. I always tell my husband, if I'm ever squished by a house, look at the right foot, you'll know it's me. But that makes me extraordinary, and I hope that each and every one of you feels extraordinary in your stories and your lived experiences, that we don't have to climb Mount Everest 10 times. I think we just have to get up every day and say, how can I make a difference in my community? And I hope I'm living that. And I hope that each and every one of you does that every day in whatever areas you navigate or traverse or work in. You are making a difference for people in our community. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I think that's great. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I can sing you a song, but I'm never going to.
Yes.
So
you would sing.
no.
Oh.
That was not on my resume. That's the truth. That's God. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.